Captain Sarah Mitchell gripped the yoke of her 737 cargo freighter as she descended through the thick clouds above Memphis International Airport. Rain pelted the windscreen while lightning flickered in the distance. At 32 years old, she had been flying cargo routes for Transglobal Airways for nearly 8 years, but tonight felt different somehow. The radio crackled to life. Transglobal 447, Memphis Tower, weather conditions deteriorating rapidly. We're showing severe turbulence reports from aircraft ahead of you. Recommend alternate airport. Sarah's co-pilot, Jake Henderson, shot her a worried glance. He was 26 and still relatively new to commercial aviation. Sarah, maybe we should divert to Little Rock. This storm system is massive. She studied the weather radar display, watching the angry red and yellow masses swirling across their intended flight path. The cargo hold behind them contained time-sensitive medical supplies destined for a children's hospital in Atlanta. Every minute counted for the sick kids waiting for these medications. Memphis Tower, Transglobal 447. We're equipped for severe weather operations. Requesting permission to continue approach. Jake's eyes widened. Are you sure about this? Corporate won't blame us for playing it safe. Sarah had heard variations of this conversation countless times throughout her career. Ever since flight school, she'd faced skepticism about her abilities. Flight instructors questioned her decision-making. Fellow pilots assumed she'd gotten her job through some diversity program rather than merit. Even passengers sometimes did double takes when they saw her in the captain's uniform. The truth was, Sarah Mitchell could outfly most of the hotshots in the passenger airline world. She'd graduated top of her class from the Air Force Academy and served 2 tours as a combat pilot before transitioning to civilian aviation. But cargo flying paid well and offered schedule flexibility she needed to care for her aging mother. Transglobal 447, Memphis Tower. You're cleared for ILS approach runway 36 left. Be advised, wind shear alerts are active. Previous aircraft reported moderate to severe turbulence on final. Roger, Memphis Tower. Transglobal 447 heavy on final approach. As they descended below the cloud deck, the aircraft began shaking violently. Jake's knuckles went white as he gripped his armrests. Sarah, however, remained completely calm. Her hands moved smoothly across the controls, making constant minor adjustments to keep them on the glide path. How are you so relaxed right now? Jake asked through gritted teeth as another powerful gust rocked the plane. My dad taught me to fly when I was 14, Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. We used to practice in his old during thunderstorms. He said if you can land in weather like this, you can land anywhere. The approach was becoming increasingly challenging. Wind gusts were hitting them from multiple directions, trying to push the heavy aircraft off course. Sarah's feet worked the rudder pedals while her hands made precise control inputs. She was flying purely on instinct now, feeling the aircraft's responses and anticipating what it needed next. Look at that, Jake said, pointing to the airspeed indicator. Despite the turbulence, Sarah was maintaining their target approach speed within just a few knots. I've never seen anyone fly this smooth in conditions like these. At 200 feet above the runway, they hit the worst turbulence yet. The aircraft dropped suddenly, then was thrown upward by a powerful updraft. Jake reached for the go-around button, but Sarah's hand gently stopped him. Trust me, she said simply. With incredible skill, she guided the massive cargo plane through the final moments of the approach. The main landing gear touched down exactly on the 1,000-foot markers, as smooth as silk despite the howling crosswinds. She deployed the thrust reversers and brought the aircraft to a controlled stop well before the end of the runway. Memphis Tower, Transglobal 447 heavy is down and clear of runway 36 left. Outstanding work, Transglobal 447. That was some of the finest flying we've seen in quite a while. As they taxied toward the cargo ramp, Jake was shaking his head in amazement. Sarah, that was incredible. I've flown with captains who have twice your experience, and none of them could have handled that approach like you just did. But Sarah knew this was just another day at the office for her. She'd been proving herself in cockpits for over a decade, one perfect landing at a time. What she didn't know was that tonight's performance had been observed by someone who would soon change the entire trajectory of her career. In the airport's control tower, Chief Controller had been watching the entire approach sequence with intense interest. He'd seen hundreds of aircraft struggle with those exact same weather conditions, many of them declaring emergencies or diverting to alternate airports. But Transglobal 447 had executed a textbook approach and landing that would have impressed even the most seasoned test pilots. Picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Colonel, it's at Memphis Tower. I think I just found someone you need to meet." The next morning, Sarah was completing her post-flight paperwork when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Transglobal Airways headquarters. "Captain Mitchell, this is from Flight Operations. We have an unusual request that's come down from corporate. There's a special assignment being offered, but I can't discuss details over the phone. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow afternoon for a meeting?" Sarah frowned. Special assignments usually meant either really good news or really bad news. "Can you give me any hint what this is about?" "All I can tell you is that some people were very impressed with your flying last night in Memphis. Beyond that, you'll have to wait until tomorrow." As Sarah hung up the phone, she wondered what could possibly be so important that corporate wanted to fly her to Chicago on short notice. She'd been a model employee for 8 years, never missing flights, never receiving complaints, always delivering cargo on time regardless of weather or mechanical issues. Little did she know that her reputation for exceptional flying skills under pressure had reached the highest levels of not just Transglobal Airways, but far beyond the commercial aviation world. The phone call she'd just received would be the first step toward an opportunity that would test every skill she'd ever learned and prove once, and for all that she belonged among the very best pilots in the world. Sarah arrived at Transglobal Airways headquarters in Chicago feeling nervous and curious. The sleek downtown office building was far removed from the industrial cargo terminals where she usually worked. She'd worn her best uniform and spent extra time making sure everything was perfectly pressed and polished. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor, far higher than she'd ever been in the building before. When the doors opened, she was greeted by a sharp-dressed woman in her 50s who managed special flight operations. "Captain Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice. There are some people very eager to meet you." They walked down a hallway lined with photographs of Transglobal aircraft from throughout the company's history. Sarah recognized some of the older cargo planes she'd flown early in her career, but there were also images of sleek corporate jets and even some military aircraft she didn't recognize. Stopped at a conference room door marked Executive Meeting Room A. Inside, Sarah was surprised to see not just Transglobal executives, but 2 people in military uniforms and a woman in a business suit who looked like she worked for the government. "Captain Mitchell," said, "I'd like you to meet Colonel James from Edwards Air Force Base, Major Lisa from the Air Force Test Pilot School, and Dr. Martinez from NASA's Flight Research Center." Sarah's mind raced. This was definitely not about a routine cargo assignment. She shook hands with each person, trying to project confidence despite her growing confusion. Colonel, a tall man with graying temples and the bearing of someone who'd spent his career around high-performance aircraft, spoke first. "Captain Mitchell, we've been reviewing your flying record and we're quite impressed. Your performance yesterday evening in Memphis caught our attention, but it's really your entire career that interests us." Dr. Martinez opened a thick folder. "Your Air Force records show exceptional performance in both training and combat operations. 2-tour flying A-10 Warthogs in Afghanistan, multiple commendations for flying in extreme weather and combat conditions, and instructor pilot certification before you left the service. Since joining Transglobal," Major added, "you've maintained a perfect safety record while consistently taking on the most challenging routes and weather conditions. Your peers respect you, and controllers across the country have noted your professionalism and skill." Sarah finally found her voice. "Thank you all, but I have to ask what this is about. I'm just a cargo pilot." Colonel smiled. "Captain Mitchell, you're far more than just a cargo pilot. We're here because we have an opportunity that we think might interest you. Are you familiar with the X-47 program?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. Every pilot worth their wings knew about the X-series experimental aircraft programs. These were the cutting-edge vehicles used to test new technologies and push the boundaries of what was possible in aviation. "I know it's an experimental program, but I thought it was mostly unmanned systems." "It was," Dr. Martinez said, "but we're developing a new variant that requires human pilots for certain test scenarios. The X-47D is a hybrid system that can operate autonomously or with a human pilot depending on mission requirements. Major leaned forward. The problem is, we need pilots who can handle extremely challenging flight conditions while also managing complex experimental systems. Most test pilots come from fighter backgrounds, but this aircraft requires someone who can think like both a test pilot and a cargo pilot. Cargo pilots? Sarah asked, confused. Think about what you do every day, Colonel explained. You manage heavy aircraft in all weather conditions. You make critical decisions about load distribution, fuel management, and flight planning. You're comfortable with long missions and complex navigation requirements. And most importantly, you remain calm under pressure. Had been quiet until now. Sarah, Transglobal Airways has been contracted to provide civilian pilot expertise for this program. If you're interested and selected, you'd be on loan to the Air Force for 18 months while maintaining your employment with us. The room fell silent as Sarah processed this information. They were offering her a chance to become a test pilot for experimental aircraft. It was an opportunity most pilots could only dream about. What would this involve exactly? She asked. Dr. Martinez pulled out a series of photographs showing an aircraft unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. The looked like something from a science fiction movie, with swept wings and angular surfaces that seemed to bend light around them. Phase 1 would be 6 months of intensive training at Edwards Air Force Base, Major explained. You'd learn to fly the X-47D simulator, study its systems, and complete test pilot school curriculum. Phase 2 would be actual flight testing, working with our team to evaluate the aircraft's performance in various scenarios. Colonel added, we should be clear that this isn't without risks. Test flying experimental aircraft is inherently dangerous, even with all our safety protocols. And the training program has a high washout rate. Not everyone who starts the program completes it successfully. Sarah thought about her comfortable life flying cargo routes. She had a good salary, predictable schedule, and the respect of her colleagues. But she also thought about the dreams that had brought her into aviation in the first place. As a young girl, she'd watched test pilots on television breaking sound barriers and pushing aircraft to their limits. She'd always wondered what it would feel like to be at the absolute cutting edge of flight. Can I ask why you selected me specifically? There must be hundreds of pilots with better credentials. Major smiled. Actually, there aren't. Your combination of military experience, civilian commercial flying, and proven ability to handle pressure situations is extremely rare. Most military test pilots have never flown heavy cargo aircraft. Most civilian pilots have never operated in combat conditions. You're one of the few people who bridges both worlds. Plus, Colonel added, after watching the video of your approach in Memphis last night, we're convinced you have the kind of natural flying ability that can't be taught. You were making control inputs that anticipated the aircraft's needs before the turbulence even hit you. Sarah realized they must have obtained air traffic control recordings of her landing. The thought that her flying was being evaluated by military professionals was both flattering and slightly intimidating. If I were to say yes, when would this start? Training begins in 6 weeks, Dr. Martinez replied. But we need an answer within 72 hours. The program moves quickly, and we have backup candidates if you're not interested. Handed Sarah a thick envelope. This contains all the details about compensation, security clearances, and program requirements. Take it home, review everything, and let us know your decision. As the meeting concluded, Sarah shook hands with everyone again. Colonel pulled her aside as the others were leaving. Captain Mitchell, I want you to know that this opportunity came about because people notice exceptional flying when they see it. You've built a reputation throughout the aviation community, whether you realize it or not. The question now is whether you're ready to take the next step. On the flight back home that evening, Sarah stared out the window of the commercial airliner, thinking about everything she'd heard. The packet in her lap contained information about salaries, security investigations, and training schedules. But more than that, it contained the potential to fulfill dreams she'd thought were behind her forever. She thought about all the times colleagues had assumed she was limited to cargo flying because she wasn't good enough for more challenging assignments. Tomorrow, she might have the chance to prove them wrong in ways she'd never imagined possible. Sarah spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing the documents and weighing her options. The program details were both exciting and intimidating. The training would be more intensive than anything she'd experienced since her initial Air Force pilot training 15 years ago. The flying would push experimental aircraft to their absolute limits, testing new technologies that could revolutionize aviation. On Thursday morning, she called Colonel with her answer, yes. 6 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in front of the Edwards Air Force Base main gate in the California desert, holding orders that identified her as a civilian contractor assigned to the test program. The base looked exactly like she remembered from her Air Force days, but now she was seeing it from a completely different perspective. The test pilot school building was an imposing structure that had housed some of the most famous aviators in history. Chuck and dozens of other legendary pilots had walked these same hallways while pushing the boundaries of flight. Sarah felt the weight of that history as she reported for her first day of training. Her class consisted of 12 pilots from various backgrounds. 8 were Air Force officers, 2 were Navy test pilots, 1 was from NASA, and Sarah was the only civilian contractor. She was also the only woman, a fact that became immediately apparent during introductions. "So you're the cargo pilot," said Captain Brad, a cocky F-16 pilot with perfect hair and an attitude to match. "I heard they were trying some kind of diversity experiment with this class." Sarah had dealt with this type of comment throughout her career. "I heard they were trying to find pilots who could actually handle complex aircraft systems without crashing them," she replied evenly. "Should be interesting to see how that works out." The other pilots chuckled, and Sarah could see she'd established herself as someone who wouldn't be intimidated. Major, who was serving as one of their instructors, stepped in before the conversation could escalate. "All right, everyone, let's get started. The X-47D program represents the cutting edge of autonomous and piloted aircraft technology. Over the next 6 months, you'll learn to fly an aircraft that can think for itself, but also respond to human input when needed." The first month was pure classroom work. They studied aerodynamics, flight control systems, engine technology, and computer programming. Sarah quickly discovered that her cargo flying background was actually an advantage. While the fighter pilots struggled with concepts like fuel management and long-duration flight planning, these were areas where she excelled. "They can fly missions lasting up to 12 hours, explained Dr. Williams, the chief engineer. "Fighter pilots typically think in terms of 1 to 3 hour sorties. Cargo and airline pilots are accustomed to managing aircraft systems over much longer periods." Sarah found herself helping some of her classmates understand concepts that were second nature to her. Captain was particularly struggling with fuel burn calculations for extended flights. "I don't get how you keep track of all these variables," he admitted during a study session. "In an F-16, I think about fuel for maybe 90 minutes max." "It's just practice," Sarah replied, showing him her calculation methods. "When you're flying a cargo route from Los Angeles to Frankfurt, you have to plan for weather delays, alternate airports, and reserve fuel requirements. You learn to think several hours ahead." By the end of the first month, Sarah had earned the respect of her classmates and instructors. Her test scores consistently ranked in the top 3 of the class, and she demonstrated a natural understanding of complex systems integration. The second month introduced them to the X-47D simulator. The aircraft's cockpit looked like something from a spaceship, with multiple large displays instead of traditional instruments. The flight controls were electronically controlled, meaning the pilot's inputs were interpreted by computers before being sent to the aircraft's control surfaces. "This is where we separate the pilots from the button pushers," Major announced as they prepared for their first simulator session. Sarah strapped into the simulator cockpit and immediately felt comfortable. The displays reminded her of the modern cargo aircraft she'd been flying, and the electronic flight controls were similar to systems she'd trained on recently. As the simulation began, she found the aircraft responsive and predictable. Her first simulated flight was a simple pattern around Edwards Air Force Base. The handled beautifully, with smooth control responses and excellent stability. After landing, she was surprised to see her instructor, Colonel Martinez, looking impressed. "Natural stick and rudder skills," he noted on his clipboard. "Most pilots take several sessions to feel comfortable with the fly-by-wire system. You adapted immediately." Captain, who had gone before her, hadn't fared as well. His fighter pilot instincts led him to overcontrol the aircraft, fighting with the computers instead of working with them. "I don't understand why it's not responding the way I want," he complained. "Because you're trying to muscle it around like a fighter jet," Sarah observed. "This aircraft wants to fly smoothly. Let the computers help you instead of fighting them." As the weeks progressed, the simulator scenarios became increasingly challenging. They practiced emergency procedures, system failures, and complex navigation tasks. Sarah consistently performed near the top of the class, but she also noticed that some of her classmates were struggling with the workload. 3 pilots washed out during the 3rd month, unable to handle the complexity of the systems and procedures. Captain barely survived a review board after repeatedly failing instrument approach procedures in simulated bad weather. "The problem," Major explained to the remaining students, "is that the requires a different mindset. Fighter pilots are trained to be aggressive and reactive. This aircraft rewards patience and precision." Sarah's cargo flying background proved invaluable once again. She was accustomed to flying long approaches in challenging weather, managing multiple systems simultaneously, and thinking methodically through complex procedures. During their 4th month, they began practicing formation flying in the simulator. The X-47D could fly in autonomous formation with other aircraft, but it could also be flown manually in close proximity to other planes. This was where Sarah's military background finally showed. "Outstanding formation work, Captain Mitchell," praised Lieutenant Colonel Jackson after a particularly challenging session. "You're holding position within inches while managing all the aircraft systems." The final 2 months of training focused on test flying procedures. They learned how to methodically evaluate aircraft performance, collect data during flight, and safely explore the edges of the aircraft's flight envelope. This was where the real test pilot work began. "Test flying is about being methodical and precise," Dr. Martinez explained. "You're not trying to be a hero. You're collecting data to help engineers understand how the aircraft behaves." Sarah excelled at this systematic approach. Her cargo flying had taught her to be methodical and precise, always thinking ahead and anticipating potential problems. During simulated test flights, she consistently collected better data than her classmates while maintaining safer margins from the aircraft's limits. As graduation approached, Sarah reflected on how much she'd learned and grown during the 6 months of training. She'd not only mastered a complex new aircraft, but proven to herself and others that her skills extended far beyond cargo flying. The night before their final check rides, Captain approached her in the cafeteria. "I owe you an apology," he said. "When I first met you, I thought you were here because of some quota system. I was wrong. You're one of the best pilots I've ever flown with." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she'd stopped worrying about proving herself to others months ago. Now she was focused on the real challenge ahead, actually flying the X-47D in the California sky. 6 months of intensive training culminated in the moment Sarah had been working toward. Her first actual flight in the X-47D, only 8 pilots from her original class of 12 had successfully completed the program. The others had been eliminated due to various issues ranging from technical difficulties to inability to handle the stress of test flying. The morning of her first flight, Sarah arrived at Edwards Air Force Base before dawn. Sat in a secured hangar, looking even more impressive in person than it had in photographs. The aircraft's angular, stealth-like design seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. At 65 feet long with a wingspan of just over 70 feet, it was smaller than the cargo planes she was used to flying, but far more complex. Chief Test Pilot Colonel conducted the pre-flight briefing. "Today's mission is straightforward. Basic airworthiness check, systems evaluation, and pattern work around Edwards. Flight time will be approximately 90 minutes. Weather is perfect, and we'll have chase aircraft monitoring everything." Sarah suited up in the advanced flight gear required for X-47D operations. The helmet contained multiple display systems and communication equipment far more sophisticated than anything she'd used in cargo flying. The pressure suit was designed to protect her if the aircraft's cabin pressurization failed at high altitude. As she walked toward the aircraft with her crew chief, Senior Master Sergeant, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness she hadn't experienced since her first solo flight in pilot training 20 years earlier. "How are you feeling, Captain Mitchell?" Sergeant asked as he helped her climb into the cockpit. "Ready to see what this thing can do," Sarah replied, though her heart was racing. The cockpit was exactly like the simulator she'd trained in for months, but somehow everything felt more real and immediate. As she began the startup procedures, Sarah forced herself to slow down and be methodical. Test flying was all about precision and following procedures exactly. The engine spooled up with a smooth whine that was quieter than the cargo aircraft she was accustomed to. The X-47D's advanced turbofan engines were designed for both efficiency and reduced noise signature. All systems showed green as she completed the pre-flight checklist. Edwards Tower, Experimental Flight 1 request taxi clearance for test flight. Experimental 1 Edwards Tower, taxi to runway 22 left via taxiway Alpha, wind 220 at 8 knots, chase aircraft are standing by. As Sarah taxied toward the runway, she could see two F-16 chase planes preparing for takeoff. These aircraft would monitor her flight and provide safety backup if anything went wrong with the experimental X-47D. At the runway threshold, she completed final checks while the chase aircraft departed to establish observation positions. Everything looked perfect. The aircraft felt solid and responsive during taxi operations, giving her confidence for the flight ahead. Edwards Tower, X-47D Experimental 1 ready for takeoff. Experimental 1 Edwards Tower, cleared for takeoff runway 22 left. Contact departure control after takeoff. Sarah advanced the throttles smoothly and began accelerating down the runway. The acceleration was impressive but controlled, quite different from the heavy, gradual acceleration of cargo aircraft. At 150 knots indicated airspeed, she gently pulled back on the stick and felt the aircraft lift off smoothly. "Gear up," she announced to the recording equipment as the aircraft climbed away from Edwards. Everything was being monitored and recorded for later analysis by the engineering team. It climbed like a rocket compared to the cargo planes she was used to flying. Within minutes, they were at 10,000 feet and still climbing rapidly. The aircraft felt incredibly solid and stable, with none of the quirks or handling challenges she'd expected from an experimental design. "Chase 1, how does the look from your position?" She radioed to one of the F-16's flying formation with her. "X-47D, Chase 1. Aircraft looks great from here. All control surfaces moving normally, no visible leaks or abnormalities." For the next hour, Sarah put the aircraft through a series of carefully planned test maneuvers. She evaluated its handling at different speeds and altitudes, tested the autopilot systems, and practiced various approach configurations. The performed flawlessly throughout every test point. "This aircraft is amazing," she reported to the ground control team. "Control responses are crisp and predictable. Systems integration is seamless. I've never flown anything that feels this refined." But the real test came during the approach and landing phase. The X-47D's advanced fly-by-wire flight control system was designed to assist pilots during challenging conditions, but it had never been evaluated by someone with Sarah's background in precision flying. Edwards Tower, X-47D Experimental 1, requesting full-stop landing runway 22 left. Experimental 1 Edwards Tower, cleared to land runway 22 left. Wind now 230 at 12 knots, gusting to 18. The crosswind conditions were well within the aircraft's capabilities, but they provided a good test of how the flight control systems worked in real-world conditions. As Sarah configured the aircraft for landing, she was impressed by how smoothly everything operated. The approach was perfectly stabilized, with the aircraft tracking the glide path exactly despite the gusty crosswind conditions. The X-47D's computers were making constant small adjustments to keep everything smooth, but Sarah could feel that she remained in full control of the aircraft. At 50 feet above the runway, a stronger gust of wind hit the aircraft from the side. In a conventional aircraft, this would have required immediate pilot correction to prevent being blown off the runway center line. But Sarah noticed that the X-47D's computers had anticipated the wind gust and made control inputs before she even felt its effects. The touchdown was so smooth that she barely felt the main landing gear contact the runway. As the aircraft decelerated, Sarah deployed the speed brakes and applied wheel brakes, bringing the X-47D to a controlled stop well before the end of the runway. Edwards Tower, X-47D Experimental 1 clear of runway 22 left. That was an outstanding flight. The experimental one, welcome to the world of flying. Taxi to the experimental aircraft ramp. As Sarah taxied back toward the hangar, she could see a crowd of engineers, technicians, and program officials waiting for her. The successful first flight of any experimental aircraft was always a milestone, but she sensed this was something special. After shutdown, Sarah climbed out of the cockpit to find Colonel waiting with a broad smile. "How was it, Captain Mitchell?" "Absolutely incredible," Sarah replied, still feeling the adrenaline from the flight. "That aircraft is years ahead of anything I've ever flown. The system's integration is phenomenal." Dr. Martinez approached with a tablet showing telemetry data from the flight. "Your flying was textbook perfect. Every test point was executed exactly as planned, and your landing was probably the smoothest we've recorded in the program." But the real surprise came when Major pulled her aside privately. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about the next phase of the program. Based on your performance in training and today's flight, we want to offer you the lead test pilot position for the most challenging part of the evaluation." "What does that involve?" "High-altitude performance testing, maximum range flights, and eventually, autonomous formation flying with the aircraft operating in full computer control mode while you monitor from a chase plane." Sarah's eyes widened. This was beyond anything she'd imagined when she first accepted the program invitation. They were offering her the chance to be the primary test pilot for cutting-edge technology that could revolutionize aviation. "The missions will be more challenging than anything we've done so far," Major continued. "Some flights will last 8 to 10 hours at altitudes above 50,000 feet. Others will involve precision formation flying with autonomous aircraft. It's the kind of flying that requires everything you've learned from both your cargo and military backgrounds." As Sarah looked at the being towed back into its hangar, she realized that her journey from cargo pilot to experimental test pilot was just beginning. The most challenging and rewarding flying of her career lay ahead. 3 months later, Sarah faced the ultimate test of her flying skills and everything she'd learned throughout her career. The mission was unlike anything attempted before in aviation. Flying in precise formation with 3 X-47D aircraft operating in fully autonomous mode, while she piloted a fourth aircraft manually. The scenario was designed to test whether human pilots could safely operate alongside AI-controlled aircraft in combat or civilian situations. Previous attempts with other test pilots had resulted in minor collisions and aborted missions when the human pilots couldn't match the precision of the computer-controlled aircraft. "This is the mission that will define the entire program," Colonel explained during the pre-flight briefing. "If we can prove that human and autonomous aircraft can operate safely in close formation, it opens up possibilities we've never considered before." Sarah had spent weeks preparing for this flight. The autonomous aircraft would fly a complex pattern involving altitude changes, navigation waypoints, and formation position changes. Her job was to maintain precise formation with them throughout the entire sequence, demonstrating that human pilots could keep up with computer-perfect flying. "The autonomous aircraft will be operating with reaction times measured in milliseconds," Dr. Martinez warned. "They don't make mistakes, they don't hesitate, and they don't get tired. You'll need to anticipate their movements and respond faster than you've ever flown before." The weather was perfect as Sarah prepared for takeoff. The 3 autonomous X-47D aircraft had already departed and were orbiting at 25,000 feet, waiting for her to join them. Each aircraft was operating independently, but coordinated through a central computer system that monitored all 4 aircraft simultaneously. As she climbed to altitude, Sarah reviewed the formation parameters one final time. The autonomous aircraft would maintain positions within 18 inches of their programmed coordinates. Her job was to hold position number 4 in the formation with the same precision, something no human pilot had successfully accomplished. "Sarah, this is Mission Control. The autonomous aircraft are ready to begin the formation sequence. Are you prepared to join them?" "Mission Control, a manual flight ready to join formation." At 25,000 feet, Sarah spotted the 3 autonomous aircraft flying in a perfect triangular formation. As she approached, they smoothly adjusted their positions to accommodate the 4th aircraft. The precision was breathtaking. Each aircraft maintained exact spacing and alignment without any apparent effort. "Joining formation now," Sarah announced as she maneuvered into position. The moment she entered the formation, Sarah realized she was facing the greatest flying challenge of her career. The autonomous aircraft moved with mechanical precision, making constant tiny adjustments to maintain perfect position. Every movement was calculated and executed flawlessly. For the first few minutes, Sarah struggled to match their precision. Her natural human tendency was to overcorrect when she drifted slightly out of position, causing oscillations that made it difficult to stabilize. The autonomous aircraft, meanwhile, maintained rock-steady formation regardless of what she was doing. "Steady, Sarah," she told herself, drawing on every technique she'd learned throughout her flying career. "Think like a computer. Small inputs, constant corrections, anticipate rather than react." Gradually, she began to find the rhythm. Her cargo flying background proved invaluable. She was accustomed to making small, constant adjustments to maintain course and altitude over long periods. Her military training provided the discipline to ignore distractions and focus completely on flying precision. After 20 minutes in formation, Sarah achieved something remarkable. She was holding position within the same 18-inch tolerance as the autonomous aircraft. The formation looked perfect from the chase plane's perspective, with all 4 aircraft moving as a single unit. "Outstanding formation work, Sarah," radioed the chase pilot. "From out here, it's impossible to tell which aircraft has a human pilot." The real test came when the formation began executing programmed maneuvers. The 4 aircraft performed coordinated turns, altitude changes, and speed adjustments while maintaining precise spacing. Sarah had to anticipate each movement and respond instantly to stay in position. During a particularly challenging sequence involving a climbing turn with speed reduction, Sarah demonstrated flying skills that surprised even herself. As the autonomous aircraft began the maneuver, she anticipated their movements and initiated her own control inputs simultaneously. The result was a perfectly coordinated maneuver that would have looked choreographed from the ground. "Mission Control, this is Chase 1. The formation work is absolutely incredible. All 4 aircraft are moving in perfect coordination." For 90 minutes, Sarah flew in formation with the autonomous aircraft through increasingly complex maneuvers. Her concentration was total, every fiber of her being focused on maintaining position with computer-perfect precision. It was the most demanding flying she'd ever attempted, requiring skills from every phase of her aviation career. The final test was a formation approach and landing at Edwards Air Force Base. All 4 aircraft would land in sequence, maintaining formation spacing until touchdown. This had never been attempted before, and the slightest error could result in a catastrophic collision. "Beginning formation approach," Sarah announced as they descended toward Edwards. The approach was flawless. The autonomous aircraft maintained perfect glide path and spacing, while Sarah matched their performance exactly. Controllers in the tower watched in amazement as 4 aircraft descended in formation, so tight it looked like a single aircraft with multiple engines. At touchdown, each aircraft landed exactly on its assigned spot on the runway, separated by precise distances calculated to ensure safety while demonstrating formation capability. Sarah's landing was indistinguishable from the computer-controlled landings of the other 3 aircraft. As the aircraft taxied back to the ramp, Sarah realized she had just accomplished something that would be remembered in aviation history. She had proven that human pilots could operate at the same level of precision as advanced autonomous systems when properly trained and motivated. Colonel was waiting as she shut down the aircraft, along with a crowd of engineers, military officials, and media representatives. The successful flight had exceeded everyone's expectations and proved that the X-47D program could revolutionize both military and civilian aviation. "Captain Mitchell," Colonel said as she climbed out of the cockpit, "you've just demonstrated flying skills that most people thought were impossible for human pilots to achieve." Dr. Martinez was practically glowing with excitement as she reviewed the telemetry data. "Your position keeping was within computer tolerance for over 90% of the flight. The formation work was absolutely perfect." But the real validation came from an unexpected source. Captain, who had struggled throughout the training program and hadn't been selected for the advanced missions, approached Sarah with genuine admiration. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "When I first met you, I thought you were just a cargo pilot who got lucky. Today you proved that you're one of the greatest pilots anyone's ever seen. As Sarah stood next to the X-47D, surrounded by people congratulating her on the historic flight, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From flying cargo routes in bad weather to proving that human pilots could keep pace with artificial intelligence, she had consistently exceeded expectations and broken through barriers. The flight would be written about in aviation magazines, studied in flight schools, and remembered as a turning point in aerospace technology. But for Sarah, the most important achievement was simpler. She had proven to herself and the world that exceptional flying skills know no boundaries. Later that evening, Sarah received a phone call from Global Airways. Was calling to inform her that the company wanted to offer her a position as chief pilot for their new experimental aircraft division, developing the civilian applications of technologies proven in the X-47D program. Sarah, what you accomplished today changes everything we thought we knew about pilot capabilities. We want you to lead the development of next-generation commercial aircraft that incorporate these advanced systems. As she hung up the phone, Sarah smiled thinking about how far she'd come from that stormy night in Memphis, when she'd simply been trying to deliver medical supplies on schedule. She had proven that dedication, skill, and determination could overcome any preconceptions about what a cargo pilot could achieve. The journey from cargo routes to experimental test flying had tested every skill she'd ever learned and pushed her far beyond what she thought possible. But most importantly, it had proven that excellence in aviation isn't determined by what type of aircraft you fly, but by how well you fly whatever aircraft you're given the opportunity to command.